Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Kermit Whitfield, member of CMC's Board of Trustees and Chief Strategy Officer at United Way of Central Ohio. I also have the honor of serving as the chair of the Capital Crossroads Special Improvement District Board here, and so bringing both CMC and the SIDS together is a great honor. It's great to see you all here today. I'm glad to see we have such a full room. We're backed all the way out to the windows there. CMC is pleased to present today's forum, The State of Downtown. It's sponsored by Edwards Companies, Barnes & Thornburg, Marker Incorporated, and Columbus Business First. Each of them are represented by many friends and associates. Won't you please help me thank them? Now, please help me welcome Managing Partner at Barnes & Thornburg, Bill Nolan, to introduce our forum.
All right, thank you, Kermit, and it's a privilege for Barnes & Thornburg to support CMC's important conversations for Columbus and beyond, and for me to get to do a brief introduction of this, I think will be a great panel. Downtowns have ebbed and flowed in Ohio over the years, but they provide a focus and a personality to metropolitan regions. In the late 1900s, there was flight from central cities, and that was sort of defined some downtowns. But we see a lot of great developments and revitalization and discovery in downtowns throughout Ohio, and including that one over there. So it's really interesting that we have these folks from different cities. People are at different places in their arc, but we're all tied together, and I think it's going to be a great group. So let me introduce everybody. We have, let's see, not in the order I have them, that gentleman almost all the way down there is Cleve Ricksecker, president of the Special Improvement District Public Services Association. Couldn't memorize all that. Right next to me is Joseph Marinucci, who is president and CEO of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. And then between them is Sandy Gudorf, the president of the Downtown Dayton Partnership. Our host, moderator, MC is Alison Goebel, executive director of the Greater Ohio Policy Center. And then before they start, we're going to start with sort of a quick overview of the numbers. If you've been to this before, this is the fourth such State of Downtown program at CMC, fourth annual. So you have seen this before. Marc Conte to my left, he's the deputy director of the Research, Planning, and Facilities of the Special Improvement District Public Services Association. Maybe the longest of all those titles. So Marc will get us started.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, it's a long title, but every word in that title matters. No sooner had I gotten back from the forum last year delivering these remarks, and when I got back to the office, I was notified I had to take care of 2 clogged toilets. So, thank you, Bill. Thank you to the Metropolitan Club for having us again. I'm with really what the organizations are the Capital Crossroads and Discovery Special Improvement Districts. These are property owner associations, are created by property owners to provide services in the public realm throughout each of those districts in downtown. Things such as cleaning, safety, beautification, promotions, and our newest program, Downtown CPAS. I'm sure it's probably not a surprise to anybody in the audience, I see a lot of familiar faces, that the health of downtown Columbus just keeps improving. Since we were here a year ago, there have been a string of announcements and groundbreakings of major mixed-use developments and dozens of smaller ones scattered throughout downtown. All told, there is $1 billion worth of investment under construction right now and $1.7 billion of investment proposed. Looking closer at the housing market, downtown has had 16 consecutive years of population growth. The downtown population now stands at 9,270 residents. With 15 projects under construction and a combined unit count of 1,700, many of these projects will open this year, bringing downtown's population to more than 10,000 by the end of 2020. According to data from Vote Strategic Insights, the downtown apartment occupancy rate dipped slightly from 95 to 94%. But if the economy stays strong and downtown living continues to grow in popularity, the housing projects in the pipeline will have good absorption rates. And on a regional basis, new housing is not keeping up with population growth, so that will also help in the positive absorption of any unit being built, whether it's downtown or in the suburbs. Now, all these strong numbers within downtown are going to help translate downtown and help create new distinct neighborhoods, in addition, over and above what we've seen in the Arena District. River South, for example, is close to being built out. Long Street, a stretch of Long Street between 4th and Grant is finally coming into its own with a lot of new apartment buildings there, dovetailing with the great Edwards condominium development along Gay Street. And all this area was just surface parking just a few years ago. It was a very desolate area. And then there are major mixed-use plans, of course, for Confluence Village around the new Crew Stadium at the western edge of the Arena District, and then the Scioto Peninsula, which are now just currently surface parking to the west of COSI. Turning over to the office market, the overall downtown vacancy rate reported by CBRE is 14%. This is down from 14.9% a year ago. And downtown had positive net absorption of 316,000 square feet, so another round of good news. The buildings around Capitol Square, remember last year I brought this up, this was an issue. Collectively, they have a higher availability rate than the rest of downtown. However, that rate dropped in the last year from 28 to 24%. I think the reinvestment that many of these buildings are making in common areas and tenant amenities are starting to pay off. And redevelopment plans are starting to trickle in for a couple of major buildings, ones that we know will get repositioned, like the PNC Plaza. Also of note, with no new public parking in the core of downtown, CPAS, which I'll talk more about in a bit, is allowing downtown to absorb more workers without having to add more parking. Much like new apartments, of course, office absorption is very much dependent on the state of the national economy. The office market downtown tracks very closely with the national GDP. Late last year, economists like Spencer Levy from CBRE were taking a possible recession out of their forecast. And so while right now we have fears of a coronavirus pandemic affecting the stock market, we don't know yet if it will affect the economy. A common phrase, of course, is the stock market is not the economy and the economy is not the stock market. Last sector I want to talk about is transportation and downtown CPAS. CPAS launched in partnership with CODA and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission on June 1st of 2018. It allows eligible companies within the Capitol Crossroads SID to offer unlimited transit access to their employees. This program was initiated by downtown property owners as a way to boost office leasing without additional parking and to reduce employee turnover, especially in low-wage jobs. Right now, there are more than 15,000 employees and 445 companies enrolled in the program, including the top 50 companies within the SID. While not all of the registered employees are regular riders, the program is having a huge impact. The SID hired CJI Research to survey employees and employers a year after the program began, and the results from that survey have met and in some cases exceeded our expectations. In its first year, the ridership among our survey group went from 5% to somewhere between 10 and 14%. And it's extremely rare to see transit ridership double within a population like that in such a short amount of time. CPAS is freeing up parking. 52% of the surveyed companies report knowing that employees had relinquished parking because they now take the bus. CPAS is helping recruit and retain employees. 34% of the surveyed companies mentioned that CPAS is helping in that effort. And CPAS is helping the overall downtown office market. Within the first year, 17 companies report CPAS impacting a decision to renew or sign a lease in a CPAS-eligible building. So with high adoption among younger employees and employees that are new to downtown, I would expect CPAS ridership to continue to grow throughout the rest of this year. So with that, I'll end it. You can get more data on all of these topics and more by looking at the full State of Downtown report. It's available on our website at downtownservices.org. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alison and the panel. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Marc. Well, what wonderful news. I am so glad to be here and can't wait for this conversation. So we are going to be talking to leaders from Cleveland and Dayton, and of course, Cleve here from Columbus. Who all has an affiliation or is from either Cleveland or Dayton? Can I see a show of hands? All right, okay. I was expecting actually a little more, but that is great. You all need to go visit these places. So I want to first, Marc, thanks for this overview. Great, encouraging news coming out of Columbus. Joe, Sandy, can you tell us how Cleveland and Dayton's successes and struggles compare to what Marc just ran through and, just kind of what the state of affairs are in your downtowns?
Well, thanks, Alison. I'll go ahead and start. And before, I wanted to say thank you for the invitation to join you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I spent 8 years, my wife and I lived in Columbus in the 80s. I worked for Dick Celeste when he was governor of Ohio, so it's great to see some old friends in the audience, and it's great to be back in Columbus. I've spent a lot of time over the years in Columbus, and it's great to see some of the things you've accomplished here. As Marc walked through his remarks, we track our market in very similar ways. We look at the office market, the housing market, the retail market, and the hospitality market, and we publish quarterly results in terms of where those markets stand. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, and we can get into more details, the housing market in downtown Cleveland is extremely vibrant. We have over 18,000 people that currently are living in downtown Cleveland. We had over a period of about 14 months, about 1,500 units of housing under construction. That will push our downtown population by the end of this year to 20,000. And we did a housing study that affirmed the demand for us to start thinking about a 30,000 population goal within the next decade. So again, we can talk about occupancy and some of the things as it relates to that market. Secondly, the office market is vibrant. We do have some challenges in terms of some older buildings in our core, and we can talk a little bit about how the Alliance, along with the community, had some strategic objectives to actually reduce the inventory of those buildings by using tax credits to create alternative uses, particularly housing and hospitality. And we've actually taken about 2.8 million square feet of office space that was antiquated and really not, from a marketing perspective, viable, and transformed that into an alternative use. And that has the net result of reducing the amount of supply and increasing the revenues to property owners, which obviously is very important to all of us in terms of the work that we do. Our biggest challenge, I would say, to think with you about is retail. Although, again, we're now approaching a 20,000 population base, retailers still are looking for more bodies, more people living in the core in order to make a decision. And although we've had some great success with some regional retailers, for example, Heinen's at the corner of 9th and Euclid, and Geiger's very nearby, which again are very strong Northeast Ohio brand names and very successful, we're struggling to bring some non-culinary retail into downtown. And we're going to have a systematic effort over the next couple of years as we surpass 20,000 people going to places like the ICSC conference in Las Vegas to talk about the opportunities that maybe getting to 25,000 in the near term would allow us to garner national retail interest, and then combine that with local retailers, boutique retailers from Northeast Ohio that have to be part of the equation going forward. So again, we can talk a little bit more about that.
Great, thanks, Joe. Sandy.
Sure. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here as well. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sitting in between two talented urban leaders that, work in very, very vibrant downtowns. Downtown Dayton, over the last 10 years, has seen an incredible amount of progress. But our downtown is much smaller than Cleveland and Columbus. We have about 22,000 people who work downtown every day, about 2,500 residents. But we have seen an incredible resurgence in our downtown as well. Sometimes, smaller cities, it takes a little bit longer. But for example, we have seen over $1.5 billion worth of investment in about 10 years. That's huge for our community. Just to touch very quickly on just a few points, we, like Cleveland and Columbus, there's this move to move back urban communities, the walkability, the ease to go from work to play to coffee shops or brew pubs. So we're seeing that trend. That's a national trend. So we're seeing a lot of residential, development. We have about 350 units in the pipeline that's currently under construction. And so that's a real positive trend. You all know this, but when you've got people living in your downtown, it's more of a 24-hour kind of environment. Our biggest challenge right now is filling our office space. We're sitting on about a 30% vacancy rate. That's entirely too high. You know, when we look at non-traditional spaces, we can fill those in a heartbeat, but in the towers and stuff, and I know we're going to talk about that later, it's a little bit more difficult. But so we are looking for ways as well to how do we transition those buildings to alternative uses, mixed use, housing, and other uses.
Great, Sandy. Thank you. That's super helpful. So there's a lot of momentum around housing, which is exciting considering what many of these buildings looked like even just a decade or two ago. Can we talk a little bit about what your communities are doing to ensure that there's housing in downtown that's affordable at a range of incomes? Because I know a lot of this has been market rate historically in all three downtowns. But, you know, there is this affordable housing crisis nationally, of course, in the state as well. So could we talk about just making sure that all residents of the city are served? Cleve, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start off by first of all saying that even with all the market rate housing that's been built in downtown Columbus, I would venture to say that the percentage of affordable housing, truly affordable housing in downtown, is among the best of any neighborhood in the city of Columbus. And I was very proud when John Rosenberger and I worked together at Capitol South, we actually pushed to have the Commons at Grant and Commons at Buckingham put in transitional housing in downtown. And so, you know, we have made an effort to keep housing affordable in downtown. But remember that downtown is probably the most expensive place to develop. And so that's the stress in putting affordable housing on the market is, do you want to spend more money to build fewer units in an area or spend, you know, build more units in a less expensive neighborhood?
Mm-hmm. Sandy.
Yes, downtown Dayton too, we have a pretty comparable market versus, affordable housing. As Cleve said, you know, the market's going to drive some of that, and, you know, developers looking at where and how they can best develop. But we know and we understand the importance to make sure that that there is housing in our downtown that fits all kinds of economic needs. I think the arcade, the Dayton Arcade, we're going to get to a little bit later.
Why don't you go ahead and introduce the arcade to folks here, because they may not know much about that project.
Well, this is a project that we're very, very excited about. It is in a historic building that's been literally vacant for decades and decades, and it sits right in the middle of our downtown, and it's been a challenge to reactivate that. And now we're excited. The first phase is $90 million of investment. It's mixed use. Great developers behind it. The University of Dayton. I know this is Buckeye country, but go Flyers. They're number 4 this year, so far. So forgive me, but the University of Dayton is taking 100,000 square feet in this arcade. It's really 8 different buildings. It is also going to be the center of all of our entrepreneurial activity, our innovation center. But the reason why I bring that up now is there's going to be 110 new, what we're calling artist housing, but it is modest, low-income housing that, you know, when you, to get all the activity gelling in that big development, which is almost a whole city block with technology, entrepreneurship, there are arts organizations going to be a part of that project. So having that kind of housing right there it's going to be very, very important to make all of that work. So that development is under construction, should be completed by the end of the year, but as I said, 110 new units.
That's great, Sandy. So Joe, tell us about affordable housing efforts in your downtown.
Well, in our downtown, I mentioned a few minutes ago that we did a major study on housing demand that we completed at the end of 2018. And one of the things we identified were really two factors. One was a lot of the, like many of the comments now, a lot of the housing has been market rate. And we've not necessarily seen the type of housing attainability from a diversity perspective that we'd like to see downtown. We know that needs to be a goal over the next number of years. And to add to Cleve's comment, we recognize that there are probably 3 or 4 strategies that we can enlist. One is to work with developers to include a component of a mixed-use project that would be attainable. The second would be a developer, when we're seeing a number of developers proposing this, creating micro-housing units in their configurations. Those are much more affordable. Obviously, they're smaller, but they're meant to obviously be much more attainable in terms of many of the workers in downtown. And then the third is, where can we find land that's inexpensive? And if you look at the eastern tier of downtown, if you know our history, a lot of the urban renewal occurred in that area. There is land available there. And again, work with developers to see if we can, again, create more affordable housing, both on the rental side and the ownership side in terms of that matrix. And that area obviously has great mobility and accessibility to the core of downtown and the jobs downtown. So again, if we could keep that within a few areas, we're obviously mixing a number of our goals in terms of the community. But those are some of the strategies we're working on.
That's great. So, Cleve, you mentioned, real estate in downtown is among the most expensive to redevelop or to develop. Can we talk a little bit about subsidies, incentives? Greater Ohio is part of the research team that's looking at the tax abatement program in Cleveland. I know that there's still some lingering contention here in Columbus around the recently redone program. So can we talk a little bit about the role of subsidies or incentives and just really kind of how that is part of the work that you all are doing or that your property owners are doing?
Yeah, I've got fairly strong feelings about this.
All right, keep them brief.
Tax abatements were developed to help level the playing field for urban development because it's expensive to develop in an urban area. Land's more expensive, you have to assemble the land, there are environmental problems, noisy neighbors, commissions. It's a drag to develop in a downtown or a central city neighborhood. And so the idea with tax abatements was to level the playing field with green fields. Well, what's happened over the years, and that's a smart strategy from the city's standpoint because all the infrastructure is in place. And so it's relatively expensive for a developer to build or redevelop property in a center city neighborhood, but it's inexpensive for the city because the infrastructure is there. The flip side is, in a green field, it's relatively cheap for a developer, but you have to then extend utilities and other services. It's very expensive for government. So from a public policy standpoint, incentives to develop in a center city neighborhood makes all the sense in the world. Unfortunately, the system's been perverted. And most of the abatements in Franklin County are not in the core of the city. They're in the fringe of the city. And that's not even looking at the adjacent counties. And so the finger should not be pointed to abatements in downtown. The finger should be pointed to the 6 times as many abatements in New Albany, Obetz, Grove City, and other neighborhoods that don't need those incentives.
Tell us how you really feel.
I would just add a couple comments to that. I think some of these incentives, whether tax abatements or new market tax credits, historic tax credits, I think some of it has to be secular, if you will. We would not have gotten most of these projects done without layering all those incentives in. And it's just, as Cleve said, because it is so expensive, compared, when you take an old building instead of just building on a green space. You go back to the arcade, there's like 25 different financial layers stacked to make that project happen. Most of our transition of these older buildings would not happen without historic tax credits. We know that there's pros and cons, but they're vitally needed. in an urban
And
environment.
if I could add to the economics, Alison, again, although downtown Cleveland's housing market is very vibrant, just to give you the numbers, I'm a real estate person at heart, so we're getting about $1.52 a square foot, if you think of the world in those terms. So just do the math. It's $1,500 for 1,000 square feet. It costs about $3 a square foot to build that unit, whether it's adaptive reuse or ground-up construction. And depending on the land cost, ground-up construction could be a little bit more challenging. So even in the newer product we're building right now, we're scraping the surface to get to $2.50 a square foot. And that's with the types of subsidies that we're talking about. So the subsidies are still needed if we want to continue the momentums that we've created. And I think everybody in the room would agree that that's important. On the flip side of it, and we're participants in the study that Alison is talking about in terms of Cleveland, I think the goal is how do we identify some additional support and subsidy for housing attainability? How do we identify some other dollars that we can bring to the table that will add to the viability of those projects and create more units in a more affordable way for the entire community? And I think that, from our perspective, that's really the goal, is how do we create a larger pot and specifically make it available for those types of projects that again, can create the diversity that we're looking to achieve.
That's great. So I want to shift gears, pun intended. Let's talk about mobility and transportation. How do people get in and out of your downtowns? How are you drawing more people into downtown? And then if we have time, I want to talk a little bit about this retail question, right? You don't have the population numbers quite that retail wants. But let's first start by talking about mobility and accessibility. What's going on in your downtowns? How are you improving it? Joe, do you want to actually, well, instead of continually going down the line here,
No,
let's jump around.
That's fine. From our perspective, a couple things of note. Obviously, we have a robust public transportation system, so we're very big proponents of that. We're very big proponents in investing in that. As you know, in Cleveland, we have both a rail system and a bus system. A number of years ago, I think we're now 11 years into our bus rapid transit system, the Health Line, which serves the core of downtown public square out to University Circle. That's been a wildly successful investment on our part, and I could talk a little bit about how that's impacted Euclid Avenue going forward. But that bus rapid transit really has become the core of some of the investment that we're seeing, not only in downtown, but in Midtown and in University Circle in the Cleveland Clinic areas, if you think about Cleveland. So one, continuing to invest in it. We have a big decision as a community to make over the next couple of years because our regional transit authority does not have the revenue base to continue some of the capital needs that it has, so we're going to be thinking about that. But beyond that, we believe that we, as a downtown organization, have to present a number of alternative modes of transportation. Everything from walkability and the pedestrian experience that you have when you walk in your downtown to embracing new forms of technology, whether it's on-street parking, off-street parking, different technologies that could augment that. Scooters, I don't know how everybody in the room feels about scooters. I get mixed
They love
input.
them.
We love them too, but some of our property owners aren't real keen on it. But again, from our perspective, how do we maximize that? How do we maximize the type of support that we can provide the biking community in downtown Cleveland? To be honest, although there's great accessibility into the outskirts of downtown is not well served if you're a cyclist, and we've got to improve that. So that's part of our challenge going forward, is recognizing that and know that we have to make further investments in that infrastructure.
Sandy, so you guys have scooters, you have a huge bike culture in the Miami Valley. Can you talk about what Joe's pointing out, that the infrastructure right now is not necessarily built for the diversity of transportation options that people want?
Sure. I would echo what Joe said. We have to invest in our public transit. And scooters were just introduced a few months ago in downtown with mixed reviews. We're bringing e-bikes in this spring, and we have a very solid bike share program. So how do we move people around so they can park once, or if they drive in, or I think a lot of it is really re-educating. Ohioans, I don't know if it's a Midwest mentality, we love our cars. We have to have our car right next to where we're going in. So part of it is a re-education and getting people out walking and biking. So we're putting more infrastructure in, protected bike lanes and all those kinds of things. But there are other strategies that we have to keep in mind, too. We need to make sure that all of you feel safe when you're walking in our downtown. So that means active first floor uses. It means, in some cases, police visibility, murals, and all those things that make all of us feel comfortable when we're out and about in downtown.
We say we want a vibrant downtown, we say we want density in our downtown, and yet we seem incapable of even thinking about giving up our cars. And for many of us, we don't need them. I mean, some people truly do need to have a vehicle, personal vehicle, but many of us don't. And, until, particularly with the three Cs, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus, until we start giving up our cars and taking public transit and walking and biking and Ubering as well, we're not going to see the density and the vibrancy we all say we want in downtown. It does take a little discipline in order to live in a real city. And Short North is feeling it now. Hopefully the Short North can make the transition away from cars and to public transportation, because it's going to become, a real bottleneck up there. But I think it's a lifestyle issue that we need to address more than an investment decision.
Okay, so we're going to move to audience questions here in a few minutes. The microphone, as many of you know, is over here. I love that Barnes & Thornburg has provided at each of your tables a little card that says questions to ask the panel. So we're going to go ahead and use that if you'd like. But let me get in one last thought before we turn it over to you all. So what's your take on your colleagues' cities? What is the thing that you wish you had most that, that they have, that you don't have? What do you admire in each other? So can you just kind of do a little bit of peer review right now?
I just took a weekend in Dayton and a road trip to Cleveland, so I can talk about both cities. They're both fantastic cities. And, if you've not been to Dayton recently, there's the Oregon District, St. Anne's Hill, downtown, all these fabulous neighborhoods and just really wonderful built environment. And Cleveland, it's the land. That place, that's the city. And you can go there and lose your car and just take the rapid transit to go to a world-class museum. These are cities that have just enormously rich built environments, in many ways more rich than Columbus, because they were undergoing rapid development in the 1920s. And so I really wish that we had some of the built environment that both those cities have.
Well, I too, when I visit both Cleveland and Columbus, I'm amazed at all the progress and the energy in the downtowns. And, that's just so very important, this whole live, work, play kind of environment. And, sometimes I'm a little envious, I must admit, but you always, when you go to different cities, you can always just come back with great lessons and ideas that you can try to incorporate in your city as well. So kudos to my two friends here and all the progress that's being made.
I appreciate that, Sandy, but in Cleve. But I would add a couple things. One is downtowns for many, many years were a place where you went to work. If the downtown was vibrant, it usually meant that you went to a department store, and all of us have memories of doing that when we were young. The reality is most of those memories were on Saturdays, and the reality was that most of downtowns in the Midwest closed at 5 o'clock. And again, what all of us are trying to accomplish, and I think Dayton is doing a great job in terms of its strategy, so is Columbus, it's the recognition that we have to have housing as part of our long-term strategy. And for a long time, economic developers and people in the business development field tended to think about that as something for other people to do.
It was all about the jobs,
yeah,
right?
It was all about jobs, and it's all about community development. Now the matrix is shifted. We all recognize that we have to attract talent. We have to have a place that people want to live, work, and play. And the only way to achieve that is to have a diversified strategy to bring housing into your downtowns that gives it the vibrancy. There's nothing better than walking to work at 7 a.m. to see people jogging, to see them walking their cars, to see them with their workout equipment, going to the gym 2 blocks away. And it's that type of vibrancy that I think has transformed cities like Dayton, Cleveland, and Columbus. And I think hopefully in the future we can continue to build on that momentum.
That's great. All right, this is my favorite part of the CMC, and I'm so excited to say it. So the CMC's tradition is to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask the question. Please avoid editorial comments. And remember, questions end with a question mark. So let's get started. First question, please. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox with the Pizzuti Companies, and my question is about the role of green space and public spaces in the downtowns. And I know in each of the cities, there are different partnerships that happen, for example, in Dayton with Five Rivers Metro Parks and others in other cities. Could you talk a little bit more about that and what your plans are to maintain and improve that?
I can start. Yes, green space is really important in that big scheme of that live, work, and play environment. And we have some great green spaces, but we know we need more. Our park district, we worked with them just to come up with a downtown riverfront master plan, where it's really identifying best opportunities for green space in our downtown. And the other public spaces are just really, really important in the big scheme of things. Dayton, downtown Dayton was named a Levitt city a couple years ago, and what that allowed us to do is the Levitt Foundation out of California believes you build community by music, and we were the 9th Levitt city in the country, and which allowed us to create this wonderful green space with an outdoor theater right in the heart of our downtown. And part of being named a Levitt city is we have to have, not have to, but that we do, but we have to have 50 free concerts a year at that Levitt Pavilion. And what that has done to bring community together and active green space, it's incredible.
And I would augment what Sandy is saying. For us, again, if we're going to continue to attract talent, we have to have green space amenities, both in terms of like the space you're describing, or Public Square in Cleveland, or the Columbus Commons here, which are highly programmed space that provide a great experience for people that live, work, and play in our communities. But again, access to that recreational capacities. You know, for example, in Cleveland, finishing the Towpath Trail, which will connect downtown to a 25-mile bike pathway, walkway, and those types of things, again, are going to be vitally important. So it's a combination, I think, of a structured program green space and active recreational green space. I think that's going to be important.
All three of our cities, historically, our biggest problem has been there's too much open space in our downtown. And you know, at one point, I counted all the intersections in downtown Columbus that had buildings on 4 corners. And it was like a small minority of intersections had built environment on all 4 corners, which just deadens the city. And so, you know, I was a big fan of the Columbus Commons, the fact we built around the Commons, and there's more built environment in downtown Columbus because you don't want too much open space. Parkland, yes, and I think we probably need a park in the northeast part of downtown near Columbus State, because that really lacks green space. But otherwise, we're pretty well served by green space in downtown Columbus.
Great. All right, and there's plenty more opportunities for questions. We'll get Lanny DJing the mic here.
Hi, my name is Eric Leach. I'm with the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. This is a question for Columbus. I'm a transplant. I'm from Las Vegas originally. I almost didn't move here because of the lack of tall buildings. So I guess my question is, with all the population growth, how do we stimulate taller development in the downtown area? Because it just seems like our developers just want to build 6 stories and no taller. Because to attract out-of-state migration, you need taller buildings, I think. So what needs to be done, whether that is, you know, extended tax abatements, minimum height requirements, what are the policy levers that can be pulled to stimulate or force taller buildings? Because we have the population coming.
Well, first of all, what happens at the ground level is more important than what happens at the skyline. And the ground level activity is much better in Columbus than it was 20 or 30 years ago. But yeah, I think the Ohio Building Code creates really weird situations. You know, in Columbus, and I think probably in Dayton and Cleveland as well, we see a lot of platform buildings being built. The first floor is steel and concrete, and then the 2x4s go up as many as 5 floors above that. And it's all a function of the building code and what is the least expensive way to build a building. I'm not sure I'd want to live on the 6th floor of a building built with 2x4s, honestly. But that's sort of what we have these days. What's interesting is the property values in the short north are such now that people want to go higher there, but not downtown. And hopefully, at some point in the near future, property values in downtown will reach a point at which, like in downtown Cleveland, we start seeing more steel going up in the downtown area for housing.
But having said that, remember that, again, the higher you go, the more expensive it becomes. So again, it goes back to the economic equation and how do you if you think of a 20-story building, suddenly the elevator systems are much different. The foundation, as we know, changes. Do you have to go down to bedrock? What type of foundation materials do you need? All of those things add to the cost. So I think you'll see more as, again, the economics improve in our downtowns. And, for example, we were talking a few minutes ago about the 34-story Lumen Tower in the Playhouse Square area, 319-unit residential tower. That's the second tower that's opened in the last, or excuse me, that's under construction, but one 28 stories just opened as well. So we are seeing it, but again, it's essentially based on the economics of the project.
Sandy, do you want to add anything, or? Okay, great. DJing the mic.
Hi, I'm Carol McGuire. Thank you all for being here. I find this topic, and always do, totally fascinating. We haven't talked a bit about public policy, and that seems an area where there could be quite a bit of improvement made. What would be on your wish list of things that would be helpful from a public policy standpoint?
That's an easy question for me to answer. Stop increasing roadway capacity, for one. Every time you add a new interchange or add a new lane to a roadway, you hurt cities and you encourage sprawl to take place. And, my wish list would be, true urban growth boundaries.
Easy.
Yeah.
Easy solutions here.
It's easy.
I might add to that, that's one of the things, in fact, we are just in the middle of taking to the city of Dayton guidelines and recommendations for our streets and corridors. If you've been in downtown Dayton, we have very, very wide streets. And part of that whole policy change is, not getting cars in and out as quickly as you can, but slowing down the traffic a bit, putting bike lanes in, and all of those things. So it's taken us a while not to beat up on engineers, so if there are engineers in the room. But, they think about how you move through downtowns as quickly as possible.
Well, how do you leave an event as quickly as possible? Yes.
Yeah. So I'm real excited about that policy change in our downtown because that's going to address many of these issues that we've talked about here this afternoon.
Let me pivot a little bit and answer your question a little differently. One of the challenges that we all face is the challenge of homelessness and panhandling in downtowns. And all of us have experienced it. I would venture to say that our communities are not what we're seeing in some of the West Coast communities and some of the East Coast communities, but that experience is all relative to your individual experience, if you think about it. So from a public policy perspective, I think we need to pay more attention to how do we deal with the underlying issues surrounding homelessness? How do we become part of a dialogue with the community, the human service delivery systems, so that we're more proactively dealing with people who maybe have had a bad experience in a shelter and don't want to be in a shelter, or have mental health issues which don't allow them to take advantage of it. So we need to embrace that as a downtown, but we also need to recognize we can't do that alone. We have to be doing that with strategic partners. And I think that's one of our challenges, I think, in years to come, is how do we get our arms around it as a community more proactively. And by doing that, we obviously help the individual, because that's part of the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, but at the same time, improve that pedestrian experience in downtowns that we all represent.
If I could add one follow-up, because we have you up there, Alison, do you know of other cities in the state, we haven't talked about Toledo or Youngstown or, any number of other cities, where you would have some personal knowledge of some of the kinds of things we're talking about from a public policy standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that were discussed, transportation, ensuring that all populations are served in a productive way. I mean, from our perspective at Greater Ohio, the state has been pretty agnostic about urban policy and an urban agenda in the state. And you all can comment on whether the state's been ignoring cities, but certainly has not done a whole lot to aid cities, particularly the cities in the state. So, I mean, to that, do you all kind of band together and go to the State House on a regular basis? Who do you take with you? Who would you like to take with you in the future to kind of make the case? Because
We talk about doing that on a regular basis, but we never actually get around to doing it.
okay.
But it's very important because, as we all know, cities are the economic engine of any region and for the state. And again, some of these challenges, whether, it's homelessness or reusing buildings and such, that takes policy change, that takes financial support and all of those things.
And I will say from our perspective, we marry very aggressively with other partners in the marketplace. Our Regional Chamber of Commerce, Greater Cleveland Partnership, the Mayors and Managers Association, groups like that, NAIOP, others that we communicate regularly in terms of what's going on in Columbus and at the national level. And sometimes we're very surgical. For example, there's a piece of legislation that's been approved by the House, now before the Senate, that would allow a transformational investment to occur similar to state historic tax credits, but for new construction. And we're tracking that very, very closely, and we hope to see success in terms of that. So although we talk, and we get together about once a year, in case you guys are wondering, to talk about our respective downtowns and some of the things that we see and are working on and some of the challenges, but we also marry, again, with local partners on a lot of these issues.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Jane.
Jane Scott with the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I've always heard it said that Columbus, and I assume maybe the other cities, are developer-driven rather than city planning-driven. Are there situations or cities, communities, where it's kind of the other way around, where the city says, okay, there's a bare lot, we want this kind of a building built on it for this use, we're going to send out a national RFP and see who responds? Or are we, in fact, always going to be developer-driven by where the money is willing to be spent by the developer?
I'm skeptical that public policy will ever be the strongest determining factor on how we develop. I think market forces are probably going to always, in Ohio anyways, it's the market that's going to determine more than anything how we grow. And for that reason, I was really, really sorry when gas prices dropped. Because as they were going up, I thought, oh my God, maybe if gas gets to be $10 a gallon, we can get some things done that we could never get done with public policy. And then what happened? It went straight down again. So, we see some policy-driven areas in Columbus, the commission areas, German Village, Short North. That is very much public policy driven. But you're right. I mean, for the most part, it's not, and I don't know that it ever will be.
I tend to agree with that answer, but I also point out that remember, there's a push and pull in development. Cleveland, for many years, believe me, when I first started in working in downtown development, the phone didn't ring very often. So we're still in a market position where we need to attract developers. We need to attract investment. So in that matrix, they have more power. On the flip side, if the community then is accelerating at the pace of its momentum, there's a lot of investment, the planning functions can begin to take a more equilibrium approach to a project that's being considered. So I think it's really, how do you gauge both interests and make sure that you as a community are doing the things to protect the type of community you want to see happen. And then, again, what we're trying to do is be very proactive in bringing developers who see that vision to the table with us.
And I think that's really important. Quite often, you mentioned that market drives a lot of it. Well, market also drives some policy change, especially at the local level, because, this trend to come back, move back into urban cores. That's important, and it's, for any city to strengthen their downtown. So they really are related.
So we're going to accept one last question, a lightning round question, and then invite Kermit back to the stage.
Hi, I'm Marcia Evans of Marcia Evans Gallery. I also want to say that I live directly in the core of downtown, which I absolutely love, and I also have a gallery in the core of the Short North. As far as transportation, I have to say I think it's fabulous. I think the C-Bus has made people very happy in the Short North and downtown. I can walk, I can ride my bike, and I can jump on the C-Bus. One thing that we've all recently found out about is Air Connect, which my building is very happy about, but not enough people know about it. So I wondered why we don't talk more about Air Connect and start advertising it. And last but not least, I love that we only go 8 or 9 floors. I think if we had really high rises downtown, it would definitely hide the skyline. I live on my top floor, and it's 8, and the 9th is the rooftop. And it's a wonderful view of the skyline of Columbus in the core of downtown. But if we had something that was 20 or 25 stories, we would never see the skyline. So we love it. We appreciate that you don't build that high. But also we want to know more about Air Connect. So I'd appreciate that.
Well, it's very difficult to market something. And I know CODA does a really good job of marketing the Air Connect service, which is every 30 minutes nonstop from downtown to the airport. It's faster than driving your own car, cheaper than parking at the airport. And if you live or work downtown, you're crazy not to use the Air Connect service. It's very, very difficult, though, because I know CODA promotes that as, like crazy. It's hard for that service or that promotion to sink in sometimes.
You heard it here first, or second, or third. Use Air Connect.
Air Connect, the best way to get to the airport.
Okay.
So, Cleve, I think you're to be a spokesperson for CODA moving forward, right? As if you aren't already. What a great forum. That was a great conversation. Let's thank our sponsors, Edwards Companies, Barnes & Thornburg, Marker Incorporated, and Columbus Business First. And of course, our speakers, Cleve Ricksecker, Joseph Marinucci, Sandy Gudorf, Alison Goebel, and Marc Conte. And thank you to all of you. We'll see you next week. Thanks again for making the trip.